Letterbox Peeper. This happened to my friend while she was living alone when we were at university. I know it's her story, but I was directly involved, and she doesn't come on Reddit a lot. We were around 20 at the time, I guess. We are now 27 years old. She's not very tall and built, very slim. She lived in a one-bed flat in one of these big old Georgian tenements in Scotland. So there was a door you get into the block with a buzzer to each flat outside. You could only open the door with a fob or if someone buzzed you up. Then steps and doors leading to each flat on the way up. There was a downstairs utility area and a back door leading to a yard with paving slabs. She was on the second floor. The doors to the flats were big, thick fire doors with a letterbox in the middle of the door, a chain on the inside, and 2 key locks and a little peephole. The light from the close was always on, so that little peephole and underneath the door had light coming through all the time. They were pretty safe so long as the downstairs door wasn't open, and you kept the chain on. Her place was all open, plan-ish, and all sorts of a one big space. Her couch was sideways to the door, so she could watch TV and then look to her left and see the door. The door itself was maybe 4 meters from the end of the couch. On one night around February, I guessed, whilst watching TV, she hears a sort of scuffle noise from the door. She looks over, sees nothing unusual, figured it was someone coming home and walking past, and continues watching her show. A few minutes later, she hears the same noise again. She looks over and there's nothing there. She does a double take at this point and can see that the light normally coming from the peephole is being blocked out. She told me at this point she just assumed it needed a clean and she hadn't noticed, but then decided to leave it and continue watching. I think at the time we were both pretty into Merlin, so I think it was a bit she didn't want to miss. About 15 minutes later, she hears another noise. A bit louder, and looks over just in time to see a man's arm being retracted from the letterbox. It had been all the way in up to the shoulder and been trying to get at the letterbox lock. She kind of froze, and after he pulled his arm back, he was just looking at her and through the letterbox. She didn't do anything, she just stared back. Then quickly, the guy turned and left. About 10 minutes after he'd gone, she calmed down enough to call me, and she was still a little in a panic. The chain had been on, and the door was locked on both locks, so he'd had his whole arm through the hole, and she had no idea how long he'd been there or whatever. She couldn't believe it. I told her to stay put and went over there. Now, I'm hardly threatening, but I figured with 2 of us, hopefully this guy wouldn't try again. It wasn't too dark out, so I was pretty safe. I told her to call the police, but she didn't really want to, which I understand. She felt like it wasn't a big deal, as nothing really bad had actually happened. When I got there, I did a quick look up the stairs and couldn't see anyone, so I figured he must have scapered off. And I have his big umbrella with me just in case. We ended up calling the local police station instead of the emergency line, and they were really helpful. They gave us advice on how to secure the letterbox. Now you can't bar it up, because you need to be able to get post, and this place was rented, so they were a bit iffy with fixing things to the door. Instead, we used some heavy-duty, non-damaging tape and stuck a crudely made cardboard and tape box over so that the post could still be dropped down, but no one else could see in, and a hand would only be able to go down or knock it off, making a bigger noise. So we think we'd fix the problem. Fast forward a couple of weeks, and she's home alone, watching a movie and messaging me on her laptop, and she hears a noise from the door. She looks over and instantly sees there's someone outside because that little peephole is dark. She keeps typing and she's telling me that she has her webcam on and she's going to point it at the door and pretend to continue watching TV whilst getting her hidden hand on her phone ready to call for the police, which I think was a smart move because they either see that and leave or not notice and she may catch them, though the res would be shitty. I decided to keep the talking going, but on my mobile, and hot-tailing over there in case I see anything. Anyways, this person just stood there for a good 5 to 10 minutes. Then she hears a soft, shifting movement, and on the webcam, not the best resolution, she can see the light. The next thing you know, she can hear the person is putting his arm through the letterbox again. Only this time, there's our shitty-made box in the way. He hits that, and it's not secured amazingly, so it sort of makes a big crunching noise, and it gets stuck on his jacket. We left the tape on, so it'd be sticky on the inside. As soon as he moved to put his arm through, she called the police and told them that that this was happening, and now this guy has broken her property, and the whole time he's flailing his arm about trying to retract it. So the police lady stays on the phone, and suddenly his arm is free and he pulls it out and says through the door, "I can come back," calm as anything, and just leave. By the time the police are there, she's a little calmer, but still doesn't have a clue who this person is. I arrived just before them, but about 5 minutes after the peeper creeper left, so I probably passed them on the way. They ended up talking to both of us as I helped put the box up, but I genuinely hadn't seen anyone and other people who lived in the tenements. Now, if the neighbor had been the chatty sort, she'd have known a lot more a lot sooner. It turns out they've seen this guy, and he had been doing that for about 5 frickin' weeks. Never very loudly though, mainly just looking through the letterbox, and the neighbors had seen this guy wandering up and down, and he told them that he was her frickin' landlord. Apparently, normally carrying a large backpack-like bag. So apparently they didn't see anything wrong with a big burly man poking his arm into her flat, which is mental. But they've not seen that, I guess. I guess maybe they thought he was trying to carry out door maintenance with whatever was in the bag. The police were really interested in how he got in, seeing as you needed to be buzzed in without a fob. Turned out, some lady at the top just automatically always pressed the open button whenever someone buzzed, regardless of who it was. And on the most recent time she buzzed him in, and he had been in the downstairs utilities area. He'd even spoken to another resident for about 3 hours before she got home, and another 3 whilst she had been sitting there. Apparently, he'd also been in the backyard on the paves, just watching the windows at the back where her bedroom is, and no one thought to mention anything. I mean, it's not a really bad area, but she's on her own. I've been always suspicious. Anyways, her real landlord put a small security camera and fixed the proper cage to the letterbox. He didn't believe that there was a problem and thought it was likely a prank or something like that until the police were involved. And though they saw a guy matching the description on the footage, he never did anything like that again. And after about 2 weeks, they never saw anyone again. So, Mr. Letterbox Peeper, let's never meet. Covent Garden Voyeur. So this situation happened to me last year. Whilst it angered me, it had the most traumatizing effect on my mother. My stepsister was born in February last year, and as a result, my uncle who lives in Australia came over to visit last year. They were not the closest when they were young. In fact, they sent each other to the hospital frequently, but they've grown closer with age. We go to a Covent Garden for lunch. Anyone that has been to Covent Garden will know this eating section outside of a pub that is a lower down than the pedestrian walkways. Now, there are always a lot of people there with cameras due to the musicians performing there. I'm a biggish 6'1" lad with a thick Irish accent, was born in County Kerry, so I can get away with ordering pints without ID. So I go inside to grab myself a Cobra and a Guinness for my uncle. Something inside me felt off. I put it down to being a big brother for the first time ever. Now it is pertinent to mention that my mother is breastfeeding my sister in public. I purchased the beverages without incident. As I walk outside, I look up and see several telescopic lenses pointing towards a musical act. Except for one. My hands were shaking. I saw only red. As I realized what was happening, he was photographing my mom breastfeeding my sister. I am not a violent person, but this cunt triggered some form of bestial rage inside me. I put down both drinks at the table and tell my mom I was going back into the bar because I saw one of my mates. I take the steps 2 at a time. I think the slimy bastard saw me in his peripheral vision and he legs it. I give chase and tackle him outside on the cobbles. This is where the fog of rage left me, and I realized what was happening. I quickly jump on top of him and yell for him to call one of the Garda, which is what the police in the Republic of Ireland is called. Luckily, a fellow Irishman was there and promptly called the police. Turns out, he had been to several of my mom's art exhibits and had been hanging outside her studio the day before. The police raided his house and discovered pictures of her house and other families. It made me angry and scared. What if I hadn't noticed? What sicko would be looking at my sister? My mom hadn't done an exhibit since, and rarely does artwork anymore. Let's not meet again, boyo. Next time, I won't just tackle you. Internet friend turned planned shooter. Disclaimer: I am in no way, shape, or form a gifted writer, so bear with me if this seems like it was written by an orangutan. Also, this is a really hard story for me to tell, but I hope that you can enjoy it as much as I hated going through it. I'm also not glorifying these events, which despite my use of fake names is actually very easy to find information on with a little bit of research. At the very end of 2014, I became extremely invested in true crime and spent countless nights researching and reading about all kinds of crimes, but mainly the Columbine school shooting of 1999. I dabbled in the Tumblr true case scene in the previous year, so I ended up returning it to the same time. The scene was subdivided into many cliques. This was the Zokhar Sarnav case, but there was only one of these cliques that was extremely prevalent and consisted of the fandom's cool kids. Only in real life, they weren't cool at all. They sat at home planning mall shootings, but I'll get to that later. Many of the people in that group came across as very shallow, moody, and distant, which one can only expect of people who love murderers. But they were something else. They all lacked compassion and heart, except for one boy we shall call Billy. He was nice and compassionate, but he hid it under a cold and shallow facade, which could only be slowly uncovered when you began to get closer to him, which me and many other of my friends eventually did to our pleasure. This boy was one of the most beautiful things I'd ever known. He was straight out of some indie coming-of-age film where the love interest is a bad boy from the wrong side of the tracks. He was just mesmerizing, no matter how fucked up he was. He was just so hard not to love, I guess. And I don't think there was one person in the Tumblr true crime scene that didn't love him. In February of 2015, he began posting a lot of things on Tumblr about the dates of Valentine's Day that year, even going as far as to create a playlist on 8 tracks about what was going to happen on that date, which consisted of basically anything that sounded like trash cans being thrown against a brick wall while someone screams over it. My friends and I began to speculate. Of course, with the state of his blog, one could only assume what could come on that very date, and many people silently caught on and reported it to the authorities. Then the day before Valentine's Day, authorities showed up at his house and had a showdown with him before he eventually shot himself at the scene. It was revealed that he, along with a couple of other people from the Tumblr true crime scene, had been planning a mall shooting on Valentine's Day and could have literally killed hundreds of people. The entire Tumblr scene was in shock at what had happened, and I eventually grew out of that dark period of my life, of being caught up in the darkness. And now mine and many of my other friends I made from this Tumblr scene's lives are back on track. Unfortunately, Billy never had the opportunity to fix himself, but fortunately, many other people's lives were saved for the loss of one, which is a gain at the end of the day, right? Darkness and sadness, let's not meet again. On behalf of myself and many of the other friends I met along the way, may no one else ever do what Billy intended to. Psycho neighbor. Several years ago, we bought a house with a little creek running through the backyard. Who wouldn't want a house in such a tranquil setting? The third day we owned our new home, our next-door neighbor came over to introduce herself. "Hi, my name is Ima Nassal," she greeted us cheerfully. We had an odd conversation, and when she left, husband and I looked at each other and said, "What was that all about?" That afternoon, I joked to my husband, "I can't believe I moved next door to someone with plastic flowers in her yard. I'm an avid gardener." The next morning, when we got up, all the plastic flowers were gone. It was a Twilight Zone moment. Whether I was gardening in the backyard or the front yard, Ima was soon outside striking up a conversation. She had a way of making statements that catch you off guard and beg for a reply. She managed to get a lot of personal information from me before I figured out what she was doing. Ima had several dogs and their barking was a nuisance. Every night, no matter what time we went to bed, the dogs would start barking under our bedroom window within a minute of turning the lights out. It took us months to figure out that she was watching for our lights to go out. How creepy is that? I politely asked her to please keep her dogs away from our bedroom window late at night. She put a huge grin on her face and said, "Nope, can't do that." Then the barking got worse and worse and worse, and she stepped up the harassment several notches. I would either be polite or just put down my gardening tools and go in the house. Even though I never saw her watching me, she had ways of letting me know that she saw everything I did. I felt like I was being stalked. She never bothered my husband, and my husband didn't believe me when I told him the things she was doing and saying to me. One day I took my husband's car somewhere, and my neighbor Ima assumed I was home alone. She started in with her harassment and creepiness. When I got home, my husband was shaken. He never doubted me after that. We had a nice neighbor on the other side of us, and one day I asked her if she ever had any problems with our psycho neighbor. She unloaded stories of years of abuse. Oh, swell. What have we gotten ourselves into? We finally contacted animal control and filed a complaint about the barking. They asked us to keep a record of when the dog started and stopped barking. The result? They barked between 60 to 70 hours per week. After a couple weeks, I couldn't waste any more time keeping track. Our crazy-ass neighbor was not happy about the dog complaint. Her next move was to call 911 the night of February 13th. At 11:45 p.m., 2 police cruisers and 4 cops showed up at our door for a domestic violence call, courtesy of our neighbor. Happy Valentine's Day! Every few months, our crazy-ass neighbor would get the urge to call 911 and report me for harassing her, even though by this time, I no longer spoke to her and went inside whenever she came outside. What we didn't know was that when my crazy neighbor had a wheelchair and after she called 911, she'd get in it before the police showed up. She'd tell the cops the sob story that she was a poor, old, handicapped, senior citizen being brutally harassed by me. I'm like 2 years younger than her. Yes, I'm a senior citizen too. Then the cops would come over to her house to ream me out for being such a horrible neighbor. Since my hair isn't gray, I look much younger than my crazy-ass neighbor, so the cops assume she's much older and much more vulnerable. After several episodes of this, we installed covert video cameras. 2 months after getting the cameras, our crazy-ass neighbor had a hankering for the company of a uniformed officer. After hearing her sob story, he came over to the house and told us to move away and stop harassing all the neighbors. To his credit, he agreed to view the video footage. The viewing left him speechless. Not only was there no wheelchair in sight, but everything she told him that I said or I did to her, she had actually said and done to me. Shortly after we got the cameras, my crazy neighbor tried to run me down with her car when I was out for a walk. When a friend of hers tried the same trick, we got it on camera. I didn't have to call 911 when that happened, because our crazy neighbor called 911 first with a pack of lies again. The officer that responded refused to look at the video footage. Oh well. And from time to time, our crazy neighbor parked her car in front of our house and just sat there and watched us. She'd take photos and videos of us inside our house. She only did that once after we got the cameras. They're covert only to a point. If you zoom a camera in on them, you'll see them. She toned down her act after that. Things were quiet for almost a year. That one night we heard a loud boom, and the house shook. We peeked out the bedroom window and saw a couple of cars parked in front of my neighbor's house, and a few people mauling around her front yard. We got up and looked at the video footage and saw my crazy neighbor's son light something and throw it at our house, towards our bedroom. Then the explosion that shook the house. We called the police, but since there were no injuries or damage to the house, only burned up plants in the yard, they wouldn't even file a report. A few days later, we met with a realtor. Psycho neighbor, let's not meet ever again. Creepy bus stop guy. I've been stalking this Reddit for about 4 to 5 months now, reading the various stories, and one of my friends told me I should post, because I've had an eventful life filled with weird and creepy encounters, to the point it no longer bothers me. This specific encounter happened only a few weeks ago, as of writing this on February 22nd, 2015. First, a bit of information. I'm a 6'2", 250-pound guy. At no point did I really feel threatened, more uncomfortable. A friend and I had made plans to meet at the bus depot in the middle of town to go to the card shop nearby and then the comic shop. And like normal, I got there about 45 minutes early. After about 10 minutes of waiting, a man walked up to me and asked if the next bus would be here soon, and I said yes, and I continued looking at my phone, texting friends. The man incoherently babbled on for a while, and I just nodded and answered his random yes and no questions. After 10 or so minutes, I decided I've had enough of this man and walked around the corner to have a smoke and call my girlfriend, so I can at least have an illusion of being busy. However, she doesn't answer, so I call my best friend instead. We talk for about 5 minutes, and I get a beep on the other line, and it's my girlfriend. So I tell him I'll call him back and answers my girlfriend's call. We talk for about 5 minutes, and the man walks up to me and gets right in front of me. Now, I'm standing in a corner with a man standing in front of me getting closer, and he asks me, "What you doing?" I stare back at him blankly and reply, I'm talking to my girlfriend," to which he smirks and holds out his hand with a wad of cash and looks me in the eye and asks me, "So, how legal are you?" I start to move to the right and did so with a brisk pace, and he stood there and said something while I walked off to another secluded section to hide from this creep who was trying to proposition me. So, creepy dude, let's not meet again. He had pre-made drinks waiting. No need for a throwaway account. Don't really care. Go ahead and give me a hard time if you want, but I am Mormon. As many know, we have missionaries, men and women, that go door to door in pairs, sharing a message. They are sent all over the world. The missionaries assigned in my city are girls. The two in the story are both very pretty young, 19 to 20 years old, and pretty innocent. Often, when they want to teach someone, they would ask my brother or myself to accompany them just in case. They would usually invite us when they felt uneasy about a person, or if it was a single man, as a safety measure. This day was no different than the others. They asked me and my brother if we would go with them to visit a man named Chuck. They said they had met him at a local park, and he seemed nice enough, just a little off. We of course obliged. They gave us the time and address, and asked if we would meet them there. When we got to the address, the girls were waiting outside for us. We walked up to the steep driveway to the house. As we approached the door, written in permanent marker on the door itself was a message. It said something to the effect of, "This is Chuck's house. Please knock. If I don't answer, call this number," and a phone number. We all laughed. Who the hell does that? We knocked and he opened the door. He seemed very out of breath and was breathing heavily. He very enthusiastically invited the girls in. We were about 4 feet behind them. Then he noticed us. His countenance changed immediately. He said, "I thought you two would be coming alone." They answered with a typical, "They come with us from time to time, they're our friends," type answer. He gave us an up and down look and said, "Come on in." It was weird. The minute we walked into this dude's house, I felt really weird. This guy's house was immaculate, but the strange thing was, there was no furniture at all, totally empty. He had 2 bar stools set aside, and that was it. And on every wall in this house was shelving with plants on them, all types of plants, and literally hundreds, lettuce, spinach, herbs, etc. They were all labeled on the wall in permanent marker. The guy wrote on his walls in marker too, weird. The girl sat on the bar stools, and he sat on the floor. My brother and I stood, and they began their message. About 5 minutes in, he interrupted them. "Oh, I forgot I made you girls some drinks. Are you thirsty?" They kindly said no, but he insisted. He went in the fridge and got 2 already prepared drinks out. They had this dirty brown colored liquid in them, looked like muddy water. He said that he had made them for them earlier in the day. He didn't have one for him or for us, just the two girls. He ended on the glasses and then just stood there and stared, waiting for them to drink it. I immediately felt like this was a bad idea, and I could see that my brother and the girls were equally uncomfortable. They made awkward conversation, and I signaled to them that we should go. They cut themselves short and we left. He was visibly upset and kept telling us to come back whenever we wanted. When we got to the driveway, we got in our cars and I told the girls to come over to my house. At my house, I told them that they probably shouldn't go back and they agreed. I knew Chuck's last name. It was on his friggin' door in a Sharpie, for heaven's sakes. And I did some quick Googling. Homeboy was released from a police department in California for general reasoning and admitted to a psych ward for over a year. They didn't say why, but there was a whole newspaper write-up on it. And I don't know what his intentions were, but there were way too many creepy pieces for me to want to see him again. Hey, creepy, drink-making, Sharpie-writing Chuck. Let's not meet. Ever. Creepy student in the exam hall. I must preface this story by saying I am an extremely tiny female who is about 4'11" and weigh less than 100 pounds. The actual incident happened about 4 years ago, but the memory of it is still fresh in my mind. When I moved to America for grad school, I was juggling with my newfound freedom, classes, and work. I was both a teaching assistant and research assistant at the time. There was this guy, Hassan, in my class. His behavior in class would often make me feel very uncomfortable, like he would push his chair super close to mine so that our knees would be touching, leaning over me when the professor would do a demonstration of how the equipment worked, etc., move his legs about and make loud droning sounds in class. Yes, he actually did stuff like that. I would move away from where he sat, and eventually, I told one of my male friends. There was little I could do at this point, as he had not really done anything. Fast forward to some point in early February of 2011. I had tripped, face planted on the icy road. I was not very used to walking on ice, and had injured my right hand. There was considerable swelling, and at first I thought it was just sprained, but my pinky finger was flopping about, so I figured I would have it looked at by the health services folks up in the university. I walked over to the school and had my hand x-rayed, and when it came back, it showed that the pinky was broken and dislocated. I had to have it put in cast. I get a call from my advisor and he tells me I have to proctor an exam at 5 p.m. These were all evening classes. I tell him I will as soon as I get back from the orthopedic surgeons, as I'm having my finger cast. I get the cast done, but I have no time to get painkillers, as I have to proctor this exam. I get to the exam hall and probably the worst pain I've ever felt in my life, and a huge cast. They cast my whole arm. I am monitoring the students and checking my phone at the same time, reading Facebook updates. This guy Hassan is constantly raising his hand and asking idiotic questions throughout the exam. It turns out he wasn't quite prepared for the test. It was time to hand in the test papers. Everyone handed theirs in and leaves except for this man. So I walk up to him and politely remind him that the time is up and he must hand in his paper or it would not be graded. He refuses. I take the paper from him and place it in the pile of papers. He walks up to me and demands that I let him see the other students' papers so he can copy. I refuse. I'm getting a little scared at this point because 1, he's taller and stronger than me, and 2, my arm is messed up, and 3, the building was deserted as it was at 7 in the evening. He moves towards the door and blocks my only exit. Move, I tell him curtly, barely disguising the fear that has crept into my voice. He ditters by the door for a bit, and then laughs, and after what seems like a lifetime, moves away, and saunters down the empty corridor, his footsteps echoing and finally, when I can no longer hear them, I gather up the exam papers with my one good hand and race down. At the entrance of the building, I see Hassan and 4 of his friends just standing around. They look at me, point, and laugh. Fear must have been written all over my face. I hightail it out of the building, place the papers in my advisor's office, and just go home. So, Hassan and his creepy friends, let's not meet ever again. The old man on the bus. I've been reading this board for a good while now, and decided to post a story that happened to me a few months back. February, if I had to guess. Apologies if I don't fit the rules as well as I thought it did, but here we go. This story takes place in Victoria, Australia. Backstory on me before we start. I'm a 16-year-old male, average height around 5'7", and am admittedly kind of fat, around 200 pounds. I know, I need to do something about that, but whatever. I am really socially awkward in public. Online, I'm the most social and fun guy to be around, but in real life, I can barely talk to anyone but my two friends. I always have really shaggy chocolate brown hair, and usually listen to music on my phone when I'm on public transport. The time this all started was when I went to the mall with my 13-year-old brother, Nate. On the way home, Nate and I were sitting on the bus like any other time while I was searching through my phone for something to do. My brother taps me on the shoulder out of nowhere and motions towards an old man on the bus. He looks to be in his 60s, has white hair and a scraggy beard. He's wearing a golf cap, a dark green jacket with a white t-shirt underneath, and black tracksuit pants. I noticed that he's staring directly at us, almost like he's studying us like someone would admire a piece of art. Once he notices we're both looking, he looks out the window and pretends nothing happened. Weird, okay, but we just forget about it and get off at our usual stop to go home. A few weeks later, I go back to the mall to purchase a game, and as I'm sitting at the bus stop, the same old man comes and sits next to me, really uncomfortably close. He was wearing the exact same clothes as the last week. I shuffle away from him a little bit, and while trying to find a song to listen to on my phone, he starts up a conversation. Because of my inability to be an asshole, to do what could be a nice old man, I reply and we start up a conversation about football and what team I go for and the like. After a little bit, it gets into the more personal stuff like, what's your name and how old are you? The entire conversation, I've been trying to convey that I don't want to talk, but he's not getting the message. I tell him that I'd rather not answer those questions, and he stops the conversation shortly afterwards. The bus finally comes, and I breathe a sigh of relief, hoping that I'm done with the old man for the day. But he gets on the bus after me, and decides to sit next to me. Out of all the empty seats, not many other people are on the bus, and I get the feeling they assumed he was my grandpa or something like that. Since I am on the window seat, I can't move any farther away from him without pushing past him, so I decide to just deal with it for now. He's quiet for the most of the ride, but suddenly starts up another conversation about who my brother was and what I was doing at the mall today. I simply tell him that I'd rather not talk and just want to listen to my music, but he persists as though I never said anything. The whole time he spoke, he always had this jolly smile on his face, as though he really was my grandpa. His questions didn't get into really creepy territory, but I already had several red flags going off in my head by this point. When I reached my stop, I quickly collected my stuff and jumped off. As I got out of the bus, he turned to me and waved a smiling goodbye, which I did not return. The next time I went to the mall was about a month later. I brought my friends along with me, Larry and Tammy, and we didn't do too much that day, just hung out, saw a movie, and did stupid shit. Ordinary teenage shit. Even though we had all came on the same bus, we had to leave on different lines to get back to our homes. Larry left first, and I began to tell my story to Tammy before she had to leave too. It was around 5:30 p.m. at that point, and I was starting to get dark due to daylight savings working against me. I had sat at my usual bus stop, not bothering with my music, and just waiting for the bus to hurry up and let me get out of this hellhole. I get onto the bus with no troubles this time, and sat on one of the single seats, towards the front of the bus. About 2 or 3 stops down, I was the only person on the bus, and the calm was relaxing. I struck up a conversation with a bus driver, a male in his late 20s by the look, Ted. He hadn't expected anyone to be here on his final round, and was going through the usual speech of being careful with public transport at night. At the 5th stop, someone hopped onto the bus and took a seat behind me. I was curious as to why they had chosen to sit there specifically, and not at the back of the bus, but simply continued to what I was saying to Ted. As he tried to talk to the person behind me, I looked at a reflection to see who it was. If you guessed, Old Man Creepers, you'd be correct. The fucker had somehow managed to get on the same bus as me 5 stops down. And in the middle of the night, I shifted at the sight, but Creepers stayed quiet and gave Ted the cold shoulder. Creepers decided to try talking to me again. His questions now in the range of, "Call the police." He whispered, "How are you today? I saw you with your friends today, and I felt a little left out." First off, how the fuck did he know I was with my friends today? His next whisper comment was, "I know where you live, you know? Seen you get off this bus before?" At this point, I was completely done with this shit. I stood up to go talk to Ted about kicking Creepers off the bus, but he grabbed my arm, I yanked it away, and called out to Ted for help. He seemed to be already on the job, and pulled to the side of the road. The hero of the day jumped up from the driver's seat and came to my rescue. Ted turned to be much stronger than I thought, and was on Creepers as quickly as he could. He grappled with the old man, and managed to pin him into the seat while I called the police. Creepers turned out to be completely homeless, and I'd only been able to get on the bus because of the Miki system we have in Australia. Basically, an electric bus pass that requires money to be on it. All you need to do is touch it on the screen and you're on. On his person, he had a notepad with my address on it and several generic male names with various scribbles of could be this, probably not this, and such. He was arrested and was locked up for 6 months on the charge of assault and stalking. He's probably out by now, and my biggest hope is that I do not run into him again. So, old man Creepers, let's not meet again. Guy lurking around KMART. Okay, so I was around 9 years old. I remember because my birthday was coming up, so I had some early birthday money from family that I was going to spend. I also remember because it was the night Dale Earnhardt passed away, February 18, 2001. Anyways, I went to KMART. It was a super KMART, so it was pretty big. I went with my mom, Aunt Janine, and older cousin Amanda. Amanda is about 4 years older than me, so she was like 13 years old at the time. Amanda and I wanted to look in the toy section, and my mom and aunt went to look at clothes. I remember we were looking at easy bake ovens. He must have heard me say her name because this guy comes up and says, "Amanda?" And my cousin obviously doesn't know who this guy is. He's like, "Remember me? We met at Walmart when you were with your mom getting glasses." Amanda says, "No, I don't remember." And he won't take no for an answer. And he starts saying, "Remember? My name's John." And my kin scratched my contact lens. That's why I was there too. Thankfully, my cousin realizes what is going on, and we walk away and he's following. So we start running and find my mom and aunt. We tell them about it, and they say that we will notify security when we get to the registers, but for now, just stay by them. The guy ends up walking past all of us, but does not make eye contact or even acknowledge our parents. This is weird, because if he met my aunt and cousin, then he would have acknowledged my aunt. He looked straight at me and my cousin and walked past us. We go to check out and he's walking outside. We tell the security guard and he asked if we want to get walked out by them. My mom declines for some reason, I'm not sure why. So, as we are walking out, he was already at his car and he had a bag with something he just purchased. He throws it in his car and walks back inside. I always thought he walked back in to lurk other children. He was obviously a creep. The man from the greenhouse. My dog and I moved into our apartment building about 6 months ago. I always cross the street to begin our walk, since my dog Acorn likes to walk on grass better than sidewalk. One day, about a month after I moved in, I was walking in front of the greenhouse directly across the street when the man who lives in there stepped out onto his porch. Typically, I'm a fairly antisocial person and would keep walking or maybe nod and say hello, but when Acorn was a puppy, I taught her to sit or lay down when someone greeted her so that she wouldn't jump up on them, which eventually turned into her laying down, begging to be pet anytime she spots someone. So she saw this man leave his house and drop to the ground hoping to be pet. This left me standing awkwardly in front of his porch with a limp dog at the end of my leash. The guy seemed a little weird, wearing a bowler hat with a long, straggly blonde hair and freakishly tall, but he came down the steps and chatted amicably with me as he stopped to pet Acorn. He asked me some questions, but nothing too weird, if I just moved into an apartment building, how I liked the neighborhood, etc. As I was leaving, a couple, who I later learned were John and Lydia, walked by with a pair of dogs, and I pretty much forgot about the encounter. About a week later, I was a couple blocks away from the apartment building in a nearby park when I met John as he was walking his dog. He asked if I knew the man in the greenhouse. I told him that I didn't really know him. He just stopped to pet my dog. John frowned. He told me what a nice neighborhood this was, but warned me to be careful around that guy. I thanked him for the warning, but didn't really take it to heart because I figured that they had a neighborhood feud or something like that. I saw the man in the greenhouse a couple more times after that, but it was mostly just him waving from across the street or saying hello as he was going in or out of his house. Then maybe a month or so later I met Lydia. Her dog wasn't particularly friendly, so I was going to stay across the street from them when she picked her dog up and crossed over to me. Her dog was freaking out, barking and squirming in her arms to get down and attack mine, which is why I had warned her to stay across the street. I just wanted to make sure John remembered to warn you about that guy, she said, pointing to the greenhouse. I nodded and told her that he warned me, but didn't elaborate on why. I asked her why, and she just reiterated that it was good John told me. She said that once the man had screamed at her when her dog peed on his lawn, and that he hated dogs, so it worried her when she saw him petting Acorn. She warned me to be careful walking, especially around at night. I understood what she was saying, but at the same time, her dog was kind of an asshole, so I wasn't too convinced that he actually hated dogs, and was talking to me for any other reason than to just pet Acorn. For a few months, I didn't see many people on my walks, since it was so cold outside. It was early February when people started venturing out again. I was walking back from the park one day and Leo, a man who lives in the house diagonal from the apartment building, stopped me to pet Acorn. He was chatting my ear off for a good 20 minutes as I was trying to politely extract myself and head inside, but since my dog was literally laying on top of his feet, I was stuck talking to him. After rambling on for a while, he leaned in towards me, suddenly serious. "Have you met the guy in the greenhouse?" he asked. At this point, I was getting weirded out by how many people had warned me about this guy. I nodded. "Stay away from that creep," he said fiercely. No one had really explained what the hell this guy had done to make half the neighborhood feel the need to warn me, so I asked him. I leaned in kind of uncomfortable, close, and whispered, "Let's just say I wouldn't be surprised if they found dead girls in his walls." I was just kind of like, well, fuck. Thanks for the vague and ominous warning, Leo, but could you tell me something that will actually help me know why to avoid him? He didn't elaborate with my prompting, and I resolved to avoid walking in front of the greenhouse if I could help it, especially at nighttime. About a week later, I was out walking Acorn with my friend Claire. We were about 3 houses down from the green one. In front of Mrs. Catania's house, a car was driving past us kind of slowly, but I wasn't really paying attention to it, since we weren't blocking the driveway or anything like that. Then the car slowed down to a stop on the far side of the road, directly across from where we were walking. The window to the car rolled down, and the guy from the greenhouse was inside. He leaned his head out of the window and started talking to me, almost completely ignoring Claire, except for a creepy-ass smile. This was the first time I got a weird vibe from the guy, though I couldn't be sure if it was just because I've been warned so many times about him or not. I was polite but abrupt with my answers, hoping he'd go away, and after a minute he did. He drove less than 10 feet forward, did a U-turn, and pulled up to his own house. I felt a little bubble of panic well up at that moment. I couldn't figure out why he'd pass his own house, drive halfway down the block, then do a U-turn, unless it was because he saw me. I asked Claire if she thought it was creepy, but she said it wasn't that weird since it was broad daylight at the time, and maybe he just wanted to be parked facing the other direction or something like that. Her rationalization comforted me, and I decided not to worry too much about it, but just to make sure I was making more an effort to avoid him. The more I started avoiding the man in the greenhouse, the more I just happened to run into him. One day I was walking Acorn by myself, and as I was leaving the building, I saw him pull up in front of his house and get out of his car. I turned and went the other way down the block, pretending I didn't see him. About 5 or 10 minutes later, I was a couple blocks away from my apartment building, standing in this grassy lot between 2 houses while Acorn sunbathed. It was nice enough out, so I was just standing there with my back to the road, letting Acorn enjoy the warm weather, when I heard a car turn down the street. I still kept my back to the road until I heard the car slowing down and honk. I turned around and there's the guy from the greenhouse, stopped in the middle of the street with his window rolled down. That freaked me the fuck out, because I just saw him getting out of his car at his house. He asked me how the dog was doing. I told him she was fine when she jumped up to stand next to me. I thought she was going to whine to be pet, but she growled. I've never in my life heard her make a noise like that. Her teeth were bared and her hackles raised up. The guy didn't seem to be fazed by it. He just kept leaning out his window smiling at me, as though my dog wasn't practically foaming at the mouth. I made an excuse and swiftly walked away down the street, the opposite direction his car was facing. When I got back to the apartment building, his car was parked out front. Not even a week later, I was outside, talking to my neighbor, Sadie. The man was driving by. He stopped his car and leaned out the window to say hi to me, completely ignoring Sadie, before driving the rest of the way to his house. Sadie looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Stay away from that fucking weirdo." I hadn't realized until this encounter that I'd never seen the man speak to anyone else, even when I was walking with Claire, or talking to another neighbor. I started panicking at this point, because no one had told me what the hell this guy even did. Sadie told me that guy had been in jail before, but she didn't know for what. She had pretty much the same schedule, working nights 3 days a week and a few months before I moved in. She was leaving when she thought she saw something move in the back seat of her car. She went inside and got her boyfriend, and when they got back out, her car door was open, and there was someone running down the street. She knew it was him, because the man running away was really tall and had a black hat on. She called the police, but nothing really came of it. Fast forward a couple days later, and I was outside, without Acorn for once, waiting for a ride. Chris, my next-door neighbor from inside the apartment building, pulled into one of the parking spots and stopped talking to me while I waited. We were standing in front of the door to my apartment building, directly across the street from the greenhouse. 10 minutes or so after, Chris and I started talking. The door to the greenhouse opened, and I could see my creepy neighbor standing there out of the corner of my eye. The guy stood there for at least 5 minutes. I wanted to look over to see what he was doing, but I didn't want to call attention to myself. Then he yelled across the street to ask how my dog was doing. I didn't have Acorn with me. I was in the middle of a conversation, and he was all the way across the street. I briefly considered ignoring him, but I didn't know what kind of crazy he was, and I didn't want to set him off or something like that. So I said, "She's good, thanks," and turned back to Chris. Then the guy started crossing the street towards us, and Chris started to say goodbye to head inside. I grabbed Chris's arm and asked him to wait with me. It was still daylight out, but at this point, I was already freaked out enough by this man, and I definitely didn't want to be alone with him. Chris must have been able to see the fear in my eyes, because he nodded and stayed outside with me. Once my creepy neighbor crossed the street, he stood really close to me, even though I backed up towards Chris. Each time he stepped closer, he tried to strike up a conversation with me, with his back towards Chris, completely ignoring him. I just gave one-worded answers, and eventually he left, going back into his house. I explained to Chris how I've been warned by multiple people in the neighborhood to stay away from the man in the greenhouse. Chris pointed out that the guy came outside, talked to me, then went straight back inside. It wasn't a coincidence he was outside when we were. He must have been watching us. Chris waited with me until my ride, okay? Then a week ago, Acorn got sick and woke me to go out around 2 or 3 in the morning for a couple days. Thursday night, she woke me up at 3, so I slipped on a pair of pants and grabbed my keys, not bothering to take my phone or flashlight to let her out. Since everyone had been warning me about the man in the greenhouse, and I am not a complete idiot, I walked about midway down my block before crossing the street in front of Mrs. Catania's house. As I crossed the street, Acorn froze for a second, then turned her head sharply to the right and growled loudly. I was wide awake at this point, my pulse beat out, an unsteady rhythm against my ribs, as I turned the same direction as Acorn, trying to stay calm. For a moment, I didn't notice anything unusual, until I saw movement and realized there was someone about midway down the next block crossing the street in the opposite direction as me. I ushered Acorn the rest of the way across the street to the grass in front of Mrs. Catania's house, keeping an eye on the person crossing the street as I did. There was only one streetlight for both blocks, on the corner by the far end of my apartment building, between both blocks. so it was kind of hard to see the person. I was alert at this point, but tried to calm my frantic heart with the knowledge that this person was already outside before me. The trash was on the corner of the street beneath the lamp, and I'm told dumbass, so I start walking towards the trash can, and incidentally towards the person. I was on the side of the street opposite my apartment building, and the person was still midway down the next block, but across the street from me. I reached the corner and was illuminated in the glow from the street lamps. I didn't even realize I looked away from the person, but when I looked back up, I could make out their silhouette much better. From a closer distance and with the aid of the streetlight, I could tell that it was a tall man wearing a hat. I immediately knew who it was. My blood ran cold. He was closer than before, frozen in place. I tilted my head down, so it was looking like I was looking at Acorn, but my eyes were on him for sure. After a moment, he hunched his shoulders and began tiptoeing slowly across the street, towards the side I was on. I was frozen in fear. He must have been crouching because he thought I couldn't see him and that he had the upper hand, so I didn't want to clue him in on the fact that I could see him. Rather than run as fast as I could to the safety of my building like I wanted to, I walked as calmly as I could, managed across the street to my building. I had to take my eye off the man for a second when I reached my building, and when I looked up, he was gone. I ran as fast as I could to the door and swiped into my building. There was no way he could have gone into a house that fast. Plus, he wasn't anywhere near his own house. He had been creeping between two parked cars when I first saw him, and the only explanation I could think of was that he didn't see me cross to the building and was crouched down between two cars, waiting for me to walk by. I shudder to think what could have happened had I not noticed him, so creepy man in the greenhouse, let's not meet. Slightly comical, scary story from early 2013. My girlfriend and I moved into an apartment in December of 2012. At the time, we were both working 2 jobs, so we didn't see each other much, also meaning we were usually in the apartment alone. For the first couple months, she would text or call me while I was at work to tell me that there were people knocking on the door and turning the handle. It would last about 2 minutes, then the people would leave. I told her to stay inside, and if it continued to happen, then she needed to call the police. Fortunately, these encounters were short-lived, and the weird people would leave after only a couple minutes. By late February, however, these occurrences had ceased, and I was only working 1 job, so I was home earlier in the evenings. This particular day, we had some friends over who were making Mario-themed costumes for an even the next weekend. After the group left, I went to bed, which was around 9:30 p.m., and my girlfriend stayed up to work on the costumes a bit more. Around 11:30 p.m., my girlfriend comes into the room to wake me up. She tells me someone is trying to get into our apartment, and it's been happening for about 15 minutes. Now, it takes me some time to fully wake up on a good day. When my girlfriend woke me up, she was wearing a hat designed to look like Toad's head, red and white mushrooms. Clearly, I'm confused, and trying to comprehend the whole situation. This hat was comically large, and with the information she is telling me, I was having a hard time grasping if this was real or a dream. Upon realizing the urgency in her face, and that this was in fact real life, I jumped up to go to the front door. Our front door from the inside sits in a little alcove that's a 4x4 with a closet to the left and a washer-dryer to the right. I look through the people to see a dark figure looking down and messing with the handle. I briefly described what I was seeing to my girlfriend, who came to the sudden realization that she was wearing a ridiculous hat, and she knocked it off of her head, then quickly turned to go into our bedroom. The person on the other side of the door is still trying to get in, so I put my shoulder gently into the door to hold some weight while still peeking through the peephole. The next sound I heard nearly caused me to shit myself. Just to recap my situation, I am still barely awake. There is an unknown person trying to enter my apartment with unknown intent, and I am standing in my boxers in a small alcove with only a couple separating me and this person who I can only see through a small peephole in the door. Suddenly I hear a shotgun cock behind me. I froze. Luckily my balls froze as well. Otherwise, I would have taken a shit. I turn around to see my girlfriend standing there, holding her shotgun, pointed up and not towards anybody, holding 2 shotgun shells in her other hand. Whoop. I'm awake now. Realizing I was in no immediate danger, for my girlfriend at least, I turned back to see the people, to see the mystery person is gone, followed by the sound of a car door closing, and a car peeling out of the parking lot. Clearly, they heard the shotgun too, and had the luxury of not being boxed in by the person wielding it. We stayed up a bit longer after that, discussing the whole encounter. I thanked her for being a responsible gun owner, and not actually putting me in danger. She managed to remove the gun locks in record timing, because it only felt like 2 seconds between when she walked away to hearing the shotgun behind me. The following morning, I had to replace our locks on the door, because the locks were seized on the outside. No idea what they did to cause this, but in the years since, we never had another incident like this. Mystery person, as much as I'd love to hear your side of the story, let's not meet. My girlfriend may actually load the gun this time. King's Cross Creep. Longtime reader, first time poster. So, this happened in early February of 2017. I was 17 years old at the time, and decided to take a trip with my then girlfriend to London. I don't want to sexualize my ex-girlfriend, but it will help with the story. She's 5'2", extremely pretty, and petite mixed race girl. She was 16 years old at the time. I'm a 6 feet white dude, fairly stocky but nothing too extreme or whatever. So, we were on our way to Camden Town. We decided the tube was the cheapest and easiest way there, so we were at the tube station, King's Cross, and we had to walk down some steps to board the train. My then girlfriend was wearing a branded jumper she bought the day before. It was a crop top style sweater thing with a Rapper's brand across the chest, Young Thug. As you were walking down the steps, my then girlfriend was just a few steps ahead of me, so it didn't really look like we were together. At the bottom of the steps, there was an oldish man. This man was a black man with graying dreadlocks. He was about 6'2", and I'd say 30s at least. He wore a long, ragged, olive green raincoat. He looked like a total creep. He sees my then girlfriend walking towards the platform and instantly starts pointing at her. He immediately came right up to her and said, "Hey, baby girl," in a thick West Indian accent. He made a comment about her top, speaking some rap lingo. She sheepishly points and laughs, then dismisses this guy. I then catch up to her being the slightly overprotective boyfriend I was. I was walking alongside her and I can see she is visually distressed. There was just something about this guy that was creepy. His eyes yellowed and bulged. He had a sinister laugh. The fact that a man his age trying to hit on a girl old enough to be his daughter is creepy to say the least. He was incredibly touchy and persistent to say the least. So, he just wouldn't leave her alone. He kept following us and trying to chat her up for the 10 meters length of the platform. I was clearly walking with her, carrying her bag and holding her hand. I sort of just glared at him and made it clear that we were together, as if to say, "Back off." My girlfriend just clutched to my arm and buried her head into my shoulder, just wishing he would go away. He then got angry. She was ignoring him, and instantly turned threatening towards me. This creep made a lewd comment about her ass, and how only a black dick deserves to tap that. Obviously, I got angry at this point and physically told him to fuck off. We boarded the train, sat down, and prepared to leave. Unfortunately, all the other seats were taken, except some facing this creep. He stood on the platform salivating and pointing at my girlfriend, following the train with his finger as it left. Creepy guy in London, let's not meet again.